And let's bring out the next storyteller, Rachel Reed.
For 3 years, I worked as a counselor at a child's detention shelter. Now, it's weird saying that now, knowing what we all know, but at that time, all I knew was that I was working with a population I was passionate about serving, and I was helping to connect them with their families in the U.S. Now, all the kids that were at our shelter were there seeking asylum from situations that were happening in their countries, which Virginia talked a lot about in her story. And so the floor that I worked on, this was a facility that had about 250 kids in this four-story building. And I worked on the fourth floor. And I worked with boys 16 and 17 years old. And what was unique to our facility was that it not only had kids from Central America, but also kids from all over the world. And so the floor I worked on at that time had boys from Central America, but then also boys from the Punjab region of India who are called Punjabi. And that's who this story will be about. Now, I remember my first introduction to these boys. They would come up to me and say, BPG. And they'd say, BPG, can I have toothpaste? BPG, can I have sharpen my pencil? And I would go up to them and say, what is this BPG? What does this mean? And they said, ma'am, it's a sign of respect. And then later I heard them on the phone and they're saying BPG, and I asked who they're talking to, and they're talking to their grandmothers. And I'm like, wait, am I being called a grandmother? And then I realized that me at this ripe old age of 31 is being called a grandmother. But I did find out later that it does mean helper as well. Needless to say, after some time, they did drop the BPG and started calling me Rachel, ma'am. It was more due to boys from Bangladesh calling me that as well. But these relationships really opened my eyes to what life was like at the detention center. And my eyes opened all at once. And like somebody who opens their eyes after they've been closed, you see only what you see from this time you started opening your eyes, and you only see it from your perspective. And so I knew that I would always go home to my wife, to my family, and I would leave the boys there every night, sleeping in that center. And I remember the boy that first really opened my eyes, and I would call him Mandeep, and that's not his real name. And that's a theme here tonight. And so this boy was 17, and he was soon to turn 18. Actually, there was only a week before he was going to turn 18. And we tried really hard because when somebody turns 18, you have to try and get their case approved really quickly so that they can go to their family in the U.S. before going to adult detention. Well, we did all we could, and the government didn't approve his case in time. So he, at 18, had to go to adult detention. And I remember the night before he left, and he was just weeping. And he said I reminded him of his mother. And I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say, because how do you console someone in a situation where they're going to something as drab and lifeless as adult detention? And how do you tell somebody it's going to be okay when you don't know if it's okay? And how can you teach somebody to accept a situation that you think is unacceptable? And 3 months later, I get an email from our director. And usually we don't hear when somebody has been released from adult detention, but what happened in this case was this boy was given a Greyhound ticket to go to his family in New York, and the ICE detention facility didn't tell him how to get to the Greyhound station. So he was walking around downtown Chicago trying to find it. And the only place where he knew to go was our center, because he had remembered going on trips at different times going downtown. So he remembered how to get all the way to the south side of Chicago and showed up at our doorstep asking for help. And so the director ended up getting him a new ticket to the Greyhound, from the Greyhound station to New York, drove him there, and he was able to connect with his family. But I wondered what happened over those 3 months, and if adult detention broke him. And I wondered if there was something about what he received at our center, as broken as it was, that made him feel like he could come back for help. And our place was broken, and the more I was there, the more my eyes were open to that. Because it was day in and day out I had to see these boys walk in single file line like they were in the military just to go learn English in class. And they always talked about that. We called it fila, line in Spanish. And they said, I hate the fila, I hate the fila. It took a while to kind of understand, why they hated it so much. But it was this idea of being institutionalized, and this idea of having to stand up straight and act like everything was okay, and not be children, not be themselves. And I also remember hearing stories, and there were stories about boys who had to wait long periods of time for medical care. There was a boy that had an ailment that was really distressing him, and he had to wait over a week to get seen. There was a boy who had to wait 3 days to go to the hospital for what we later found out was a punctured lung. And so, things like this kept happening. And then the real darker side of some boys who were mischievous being sent to our director for discipline, and him disciplining them by telling them that they would be deported if they didn't shape up. And now we all know that that isn't true, and that he didn't have the power to do that. But these kids didn't know that, and they would come to me sobbing and asking, if that was really true. And, that just added to the psychological trauma that they were already experiencing, and I felt that as a counselor. And so over time, these things kept happening. I talked to the director of the director. I talked to Human Resources about my misgivings. I talked to the union, but it all kind of ended in a full stop. And sometimes the director I talked about was actually promoted. And so I decided at that time that it was time to quit. It was time. I didn't know if I was harming these kids more than helping them by being a part of the system. And when I decided to quit, I had in the back of my mind that I might talk to news reporters. I might write an article or something about what was happening there. But I didn't really know if it was something that would be of interest to people. I didn't know if it would gain traction. And I got a new job, and I was there for a couple months, and then family separation happened. And there I was watching the TV, seeing these kids in cages and knowing exactly where they were going to be sent. And I hear the news reporters with all these questions and not knowing much about these children's shelters, and realizing that I had answers, and realizing that this was the time to tell this story. And so I left an anonymous tip with NPR and got a call back about a week later from a lady named Meg. And I talked to her for about an hour about my experiences there. And at the end of the interview, she said, "Now, would you mind thinking about going on the record with what you said? Because I think this could be of use to people." And she said, "I'll give you the weekend to think about it, because I know this will be a difficult decision." And it was, because at the facility where I worked, they told me that they didn't want us to talk to the media. And so I was scared, would I lose my new job? Would this hurt my career? But on that weekend, I was actually flying into California, to Sacramento. And so I flew into San Francisco and got a rental car there. And I was driving to my temporary apartment in Sacramento, and I took a wrong turn when I was almost there. And so I turn around in a gas station, and I go to the gas station to get food and to pay for gas. And as I walk in, I look to my right, and I see this boy, and he looks so familiar. And he reminds me of work, and he kind of takes a double look too, and he says, "Rachel, ma'am?" And I said, "Hello," and he said, "Rachel, ma'am, the counselor, thank you for helping me." And we don't talk for long. He proceeds to tell me that he was eating some free gas station food that he got from the gas station clerk. He's like, "He helps me." And it just made me think, it made me wonder, are these centers really setting these kids up for success? Was this child, at this point homeless and needing to get free food, or, what was going on in this situation? And it made me realize that I had to go on the record and share this information with other people. And so I did. And it was after that experience that I started, when I came back to Chicago, being involved with groups and activism around the issue of child detention, and actually started working with a group working to end child detention. And actually, as I was working on telling this story, I contacted Meg again because I wasn't sure if the interview ever aired. And she told me that it didn't. But at that moment, I didn't care, because this experience had stoked a fire that was ignited by these boys, the ones that called me BPG.